My name is Wissam. I am 43. I was born in January in Baghdad. The next month, Ayatollah Khomeini led the Islamic Revolution in the neighboring Iran. A few months later, Saddam Hussein became the dictator of that country. A few months later, the war between the two countries started to last for 8 years. That was my childhood. I grew up, I was born and raised in a typical world that was not told to love one another. A world that did not have Christ and did not have the gospel. Shortly after the end of the Iraq-Iran war, Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait. We had the sanctions that lasted for 13 years, in which my whole family lived on $1 a month. And we had the Gulf War of 1991. Now, up until that point, Saddam Hussein was not a religious leader. He was a socialist, secular military dictator, obsessed with the Soviet model. He liked Stalin, and he wanted to turn Iraq from a rural community into a military power. But in the aftermath of the first Gulf War, there was an Islamic revolt against him, a Shiite revolt in the south. That's when he realized that he could not impose a socialist, secular system on the predominantly Muslim people of Iraq. So after he crushed that revolt, killing tens of thousands of his own people, he started to put on a show of Islam. He wrote Allahu Akbar on the Iraqi flag. He ordered the Quran to be taught in the Iraqi schools before graduation from high school. He built hundreds and hundreds of mosques all over Iraq, and he started to turn Iraq from being secular to being more Islamic. My father retired in 1992, pretty much did not do anything ever since. My mom, a hard-working, self-sacrificing woman, started working as a seamstress, mending the clothes of our neighborhood to provide for me and my family in the Iraqi version of the Great Depression. I was in the middle of my teenage years, in the middle of the 1990s, when it was obvious to me that Iraq was at enmity with every other culture and everything that is different in this whole entire world. Hate was being preached against you when I did not know you, when I did not have any reason to hate you. And I decided to not subscribe to any culture that preaches that kind of hate. It is very ironic, and it is very sad that it was hate that eventually brought me all the way from that culture and from that part of the world, only to come over here and see almost the exact same hate preached against my own people on the social media and in every comment section and the news websites. Like every Iraqi, I had that vacuum inside of me, the vacuum that is described by Blaise Pascal, a God-shaped vacuum that cannot be filled with anything except by God, made known by Jesus Christ. And I tried to fill that void, fill that vacuum. Something did not make sense in that culture. The culture that was turning more religious and more Islamic day by day, that was also supported by the pan-Arab nationalist Ba'ath Party culture. Hate was being preached everywhere. Iraq was kind of secure at the time. We did not have car bombs. We did not have Al-Qaeda or ISIS. But all of that was a culture preached in schools, taught in the limited government channels. We only had 2 government-run TV channels, 2 government radio stations, 3 government newspapers, and that's it. The internet, the cell phones, the satellite channels, already common in all the neighboring countries of Iraq, were banned under Saddam Hussein, and the government only told us what they wanted us to learn. Well, like every Iraqi, I had that vacuum, and I wanted to look for fulfillment for it. Unlike the religious, devout members of the Muslim community of Iraq, I was not distracted from realizing that vacuum by keeping the Islamic rituals, praying 5 times a day, fasting every Ramadan, reciting the Quran without bothering to understand what the Quran really says. In all fairness, we did not starve for food or water because we had a socialist government that provided us almost with everything for free at the time. But we were starving for a different kind of bread and a different kind of water that we did not even understand. My 4-year-old sister passed away in 1996. My mom, a panicked mother in the funeral of her daughter, was begging for someone to tell her in the funeral that that innocent child went to heaven. No one was able to provide her with that hope, and the only man who was knowledgeable in the Quran in the funeral told her, quote, she will be judged for the very first breath she took in when she was born. That's when I started to think, what kind of God is that? A few months later, my uncle got cancer. He was my most favorite uncle. I had a lot of uncles and aunts. Both my grandparents had 3 wives each at a time. He was my most favorite. He was so kind and so generous and so humorous. We had so many inside jokes. But he was in his deathbed crying every time I tried to crack a joke to him. Not only because he saw his death coming, which he did in a few days, but because for the first time in his life, he was unable to go to the bathroom, to get ritually clean, to do the ritual prayers every Muslim is required to do 5 times a day. He had spent his whole life a devout Muslim, and he thought God was done with him, and he died without hope. That's when I decided that's it between me and God and everything that resembles religion. Rejected Islam and became an atheist. I thought I would be happy if I lived in a world that did not have God. I mean, imagine, well, especially with the fact that the only thing that Islam assures you of is hellfire. What's the point of piety anyway? Imagine living in a life where you have a beginning and an end, and you can do whatever you want in between with no consequences. And yet somewhere deep inside of me, I was not happy. I was looking for a sense of direction. I was looking for an ear that listens to me, an eye that watches over me. I was looking for a heart that loves me. And I continued to try to fill that void that was inside of me, listening to music, reading books, watching movies, and most of the books that I read and the movies that I watched quoted the Bible. Now, as we have been learning in the past couple of days, a Muslim does believe in the inspiration of the Bible. A Muslim has no issue with the source of the Bible. Muslims challenge the preservation of the Bible, though. So Muslims claim that this Bible that we have today is not the same Bible that was revealed and that inspired the men, the holy men of God of old. I was not religious anyway, so I did not care. But those books and those movies continue to quote the Bible. In fact, I was in the 2nd year studying civil engineering at the University of Baghdad when the first Mission Impossible movie was released. Tom Cruise picked the Gideon's Bible and read Job 3:14. That was the first time in my life I ever got a sneak peek at the Bible. I got so curious to get myself a copy of the Bible only to understand these quotes in these movies and in these books. So I went to a flea market in Baghdad and bought my first Bible, which was the Gospel of John. I did not find Job 3:14 in the Gospel of John, so I thought Muslims were right. Everybody is making up a different Bible. I mean, who is John anyway? Something caught my attention, though, in the Gospel of John, the way Jesus pointed fingers at the hypocritical religious authorities of his time, calling them liars. Something you're not supposed to do in the puritanical Muslim community that I came from. I was raised by 2 devout Muslim parents that taught me that every imam is a true steward of God's word, and we should not question them even when they misquote their own scriptures. I have always identified myself as a rebel, and I did not want to do that. Well, I was as much of a rebel as Jesus in that book, which I did not care if it was true or good or not. Jesus called them liars, children of your father the devil. I did not care, though. Threw the gospel away. Finished my 2nd year in college. I was in the summer holiday between the 2nd and the 3rd year in 1998, back in that same flea market, flipping the New Testament. I found the Gospel of John in the New Testament. That was the first time in my life I learned that the Gospel of John was not another Bible. It was part of a bigger book, so I bought the New Testament. Few days later, I learned that the New Testament was part of another bigger book. I ran out of money, borrowed money from my cousin, and bought my first complete Bible. The beauty of the Bible caught my attention first. How to Read Literature Like a Professor, written by Thomas Foster, says in page 60, and he's not a believer and he does not claim to be so, that the Bible is the most influential piece of literature that was ever written. Every story or movie or book or painting or song or poem that you have ever been exposed to is inspired at least indirectly by the Bible. And then I started to fall in love with the goodness of the Bible way before I believed in its truth. The Bible is a good book, believe it or not. The Bible preaches love and not hate. The Bible preaches forgiveness and not vengeance. The Bible preaches peace, integrity, and benevolence, things I did not normally associate with religion. And I was so impressed with the accurate historical and geographic description in the Bible of a world that I was familiar with. Babylon, that's 50 miles to the south of my parents' house. The Babylonians, the Assyrians, these were the native Iraqis that yours truly's forefathers invaded and drove them away from Iraq. The captivity was the pride of the Iraqi history that we studied in Saddam Hussein's 7th grade school. Nebuchadnezzar, his poster is next to Saddam Hussein's picture in every street corner in Iraq. And I was thinking, man, whoever made up this book really knew his history and geography. I started to fall in love with that book. I had so many questions, but I did not have any Christian friends in my now all-Muslim neighborhood. And I did not remember finding any Christian friends in my college. The 3rd year started. A man just like that was in my classroom. He had a big cross on his shirt. He obviously flunked the 3rd year. I went to him. I said, "Are you a Christian?" He said, "I am." I said, "I got myself a copy of the Bible. I think it's an intriguing book. I have a few questions. Are you a believer?" He said, "Go ahead." I said, "Do you Christians believe that you're saved by God's grace or by your obedience?" Yeah, I read the book of Romans. Like every preacher, he did not directly answer my question, but took the opportunity to take me aside and explain the gospel message to me for the first time in my life. I was 19. That was late 1998. He talked about how God is a holy and just God that does not tolerate sin, but at the same time, he's a loving God, so he sent his son to take our sins on him and die on the cross for us. It's a combination of God's grace and our obedience to him. I said, "Interesting. I have one more question. Do you really believe that?" You know, here in the Western world, you describe an absolute truth as of a gospel truth. Back where I came from, the word Bible is synonymous with corruption. When somebody deceives you, you would say your rhetoric is as corrupt as the Bible. Now, I know that the most educated part of the world is too smart to follow a made-up book, but do you personally really, does your culture really believe in this Bible? Because who in his or her right mind believes in a God who is one, but he is also three? He said, "Oh yeah, we believe." The next day, he brought me some literature written by Josh McDowell that talked about how many tens of thousands of Bible manuscripts we have today in the museums from different times, from different places, written in different languages, all matching each other. There is no way the Islamic claim that the Bible is corrupt is true. And I was so happy to learn that the book that had the solution to every problem my community was suffering from turned out to be true. I was so glad to learn that the book that was both beautiful and good turned out to be true. That's when I became a believer. I thought everybody else would be as happy. I was wrong. It is unthinkable. And by the way, what Islam says is one thing. What happens in real life is another thing. Once you join Islam, you place a death sentence on yourself. That's the only argument that Islam has. And that is, if you convert out of Islam, you need to get killed. The first person I wanted to share the gospel with was that woman that I loved the most. The woman that gave all that she had and all that she is for me, knowing that on one day I would probably leave her for good. My mom used to wake up before me to make breakfast for me every morning, even to the very last day before I came to the United States. And at that time, she would not answer when I say, "Good morning, Mom." One morning I said, "Mom, what's wrong?" She turned to me with tears on her cheeks, grabbed me by the collar, and asked me, "Please tell me, what did I fail to provide to you that you do this thing to me?" I said, "What thing?" She said, "I've been working day and night to make a human being out of you. I've been wearing my eyes out on that sewing machine, and you've been using my money to buy that blasphemous book that I've been seeing among your college books. Look at yourself, grow up." With that, with the lack of encouragement, with the lack of wisdom, with the fact that I started to lose most of my Muslim friends after they learned that I've been reading the Bible, and did not gain any new Christian friends because of the prejudices of the traditionally Muslim Arab community and the traditionally Christian Chaldean and Armenian and Assyrian community in Iraq. And with the fact that I started to get harassed by the religious authorities in my neighborhood, I came to that point where I thought to myself, this is just wrong. Maybe there is no God. Maybe the gospel was just another philosophy I wanted to entertain and distract myself with. And I renounced the Christian faith and gave away my Bible. Only a few months later, I realized that the hope and the satisfaction and the assurance and the fulfillment that I had when I claimed God's promises in the Bible as my own would not be replaced with any security in life. I'd rather be a persecuted Christian with a sense of direction than a comfortable non-believer with no hope. So I got the new Bible in English this time, so my mom would not understand what I'm reading. And I continued to read the Bible in secret for the rest of my stay in Baghdad. My biggest challenge was that it would take me 12 years going to every single church building in Baghdad trying to get baptized in vain. So I finished college in the year 2000. I finished my mandatory military service as a Republican Guard in 2002. The American Army came in 2003. Thank you for your service. For the first time, we started to be open to the rest of the world. We started to have the internet. I would go online and download Christian materials and Christian sermons and Christian songs and upload them to my MP3 player and read a passage from the Bible as I take the bus to work every morning. In fact, eSword was the very second thing that I downloaded from the internet, and everything continued to have the same tone to it until that one morning in October of 2009. I was working as a sanitary engineer at the Iraqi Department of Public Works, was on my way from the second to the first floor making a phone call when a truck bomb rocked that building, and a second truck bomb rocked the second building a few blocks away, which was the Baghdad City Hall. 1,500 people got killed or injured in this double explosion. I came out of it without a scratch. I was in the concrete staircase, right in the middle of that pillar of fire. We moved to a substitute building in another neighborhood in Baghdad that had an internet cafe next to it. I used to go to that internet cafe every afternoon after work, and I had to pay a flat rate to use the internet for an hour. Wouldn't take me more than a few minutes to check my emails, after which I would be looking up random things on the internet. And one afternoon, I randomly typed free Bible study, and I signed up for freebiblestudy.org. A woman was assigned to grade my Bible tests, and she asked me in her first email if I had any prayer requests. I said, yeah, I have been a believer for 12 years, and this is Baghdad, where we don't exactly have a baptistry in every street corner. So I have been trying to get baptized for the past decade plus. Would you please pray that God would make this possible for me? And would you please pray that I can live in a Christian-friendly community where I can say Jesus is Lord without getting killed right on the spot? That same day, April 13, 2010, I came across a free book called Bible Basics, written by a British man who had a ministry in Latvia. And he answered me when I placed an order for a free copy of that book. He answered me with an automatic email. He introduced himself and his ministry, and he randomly said, and if you're not baptized, I can come over and baptize you. I said, thank you, sir. I'm from Baghdad. Read the address. He said, I'm coming to it. I can baptize in you. May 2010, he came all the way from Latvia to northern Iraq, paid for my bus ticket to go from Baghdad to Kurdistan in northern Iraq, and baptized me in a bathtub in a hotel room. The woman that was grading my Bible tests used to be a caregiver for a quadriplegic man in the Amish country of Pennsylvania in a house church. She told the preacher of that house church about me, who told her, tell that Iraqi if he plans to come over here, he can stay with us indefinitely for free, and I will help him establish his life in the United States. A few weeks later, the American embassy in Baghdad started issuing personal visas for Iraqis for the first time in 20 years since the Gulf War. So I applied for the visa, quit my job, packed my one bag, said the final goodbyes to my family, flew all the way from Baghdad to New York City, took the bus from Port Authority to Reading, Pennsylvania, where that woman and that man were waiting for me. And they took me to live with them happily ever after in Boyertown, Pennsylvania, which was very depressing to me. I came from a 7 million people metropolis, and now I was in the woods with nothing around me. Just 2 elderly and 1 quadriplegic that I was helping taking care of. I could not take the bus to go anywhere. I could not go grocery shopping. I could not go get a haircut. But that was the most spiritually refreshing part of my life. We almost had a Bible study and a hymn sing every day. And during one of these hymn sings, I met the first members of the church that I go to. And this man said, young man, what brought you all the way from Baghdad to the Amish country? And he would be the first man that would listen to what you are listening to this morning as my story. When I finished, he literally looked at me and said, say this one more time. I told him my story one more time. He said, I want you to share that in my church. He's not a pastor. He's not a deacon. He's not an elder. He's just a rich old man. So they listened to him. I said, sir, you realize only a few months ago I could not even go to church without raising unnecessary suspicions. I have never spoken in public, not in my second language. He said, you need to testify to what Jesus has done in your life. And he had me speak in a church, in his church in Camp Hill, Pennsylvania, the preacher of which turned out to be a graduate of the Bible school I eventually ended up going to in Lubbock, Texas. He said, would you like to go to a Bible school? I said, no. He said, this church will raise $1,400 in support money for you. I said, now you're talking. And they sent me to school, and they started raising support money for me before they could pronounce my last name. At the time when I ran out of the last dollar that I brought with me from Iraq. And before I knew it, I was in my first day in class, in school, in the school's chapel, with the dean of students asking me what my plans were after I graduate. Like I've been planning for this my whole life. I said, what plans? How did I end up here? And then I remembered that for years back in my hometown of Baghdad, I used to beg God every night to do exactly what you're doing now. To be able to worship him for free, just to go to church and learn about him and fellowship with other believers and sing his praises. And in return, I'm going to serve him for the rest of my life. Every Christian has a gift, like we heard yesterday from our own Josh McDowell. A gift or a talent that we are expected to invest in God's kingdom. And my gift happened to be my Muslim background and my Arabic culture. And I said I plan to take the gospel to the Arab communities in the United States. We had an evangelism teacher there in Lubbock, Texas, who was from Michigan, who connected me with the local churches. And eventually, I was established. I moved in January of 2014 to the Detroit area to start the Arab Christian ministry that tells Muslims about Christ and tells Christians about Islam. ACM. You can see the tables and the materials that are there. I started working and was and still is standing on the shoulders of my fellow laborers in the gospel, including a few who are sitting among us now. Over a decade ago, I used to hide my faith to stay alive. Today, I share my faith to make a living. Look at me deep in the eye and tell me there is no God. This ends the part of my conversion story and how I came to the Detroit area. Lord willing, on Saturday, I will be speaking about part of the work that the Arab Christian ministry is doing, which is now our biggest work in the Dearborn area, the ministry that we are doing in the parks of Dearborn every summer. It was yonder in Baghdad where I was born, to Muslim parents suffering World War torn. Did not know Jesus, but Saddam Hussein, wherefore its poor people have gone insane. I grew up hopeless, my heart not to fill, and hearing mosques preaching tidings so ill. I thought, Lord, whether thou art there or not, I henceforth untie our inherited knot. I searched for idols, books and thoughts and plays and philosophies and well-written essays. But through these idols, God's word subtly spoke, and my mind it brought to Christ's lighter yoke. Then came I hither by his endless grace to speak his tidings all over this place. You want the written version? It is available on the ACM's table. Thank you, and God bless.